losing the sense of oneness or the sense of shared meaning that gives us this existential identity crisis. This is part 2 of processing my identity crisis, and this one will be about the loss of ethical substance and how men are perpetually adolescent and women are prematurely mature. These are quotes that I pulled from The Courage of Hopelessness from Zizek. And if you're interested in the full story, go back to the first episode video and I'll just start with the second. So we're still in the populist temptation, and we're on page 270. In his new book, The True Life, Alain Badiou warns about the dangers of the growing post-patriarchal nihilist order that presents itself as the domain of new freedoms. I might be making videos on this tiny book, which is A.Honneth's Leden an Überstimmtheit, in English, The Pathologies of Individual Freedoms, reading it for my class of Hegel. But let's come back to the text. We live in an extraordinary era where there is no tradition on which we can base our identity, no frame of meaningful life. And interesting here how tradition is defined as a frame of meaningful life. I think it's interesting in terms of, you know, continuity, accumulation of meaning. It's kind of like, you know, something is placed on how it is that something has developed over time. Think of like how brands try to sell you on this idea of heritage to give it meaning, to give it value so that you pay more money because you're like, I'm a part of this heritage from purchasing. Meaningful life that might enable us to live in a life beyond hedonistic reproduction. You know, this new world disorder, this gradually emerging worldless civilization exemplarily affects the youth who oscillates between the intensity of fully burning out, sexual enjoyment, drugs, alcohol, up to violence, and the endeavor to succeed, study, make a career, earn money within the existing capitalistic order. So I think we all can relate to this. The only alternative being a violent retreat into some artificially resuscitated tradition. And I think a lot about, like, you know, Netflix, you know, how it is that they have Bridgerton. I'm trying not to make like too much cultural commentary, but nostalgia. I think there's something to be said about nostalgia. I have a friend who is in retirement. She's around like 66, I think, or 68. And I was like at her apartment with like one of her friends, and they both were just like, it really was not that bad before. It really was not that complicated before, at least in France. And she's like really traveled the world and everything, and she's kind of like bohemian. But, you know, they say like everyone of their time would say that their time is the worst. But speaking to them, it seems that there is a time where people didn't feel like it was the worst time to be alive. I don't think that I have no frame of reference, right? How do I know if this is the worst or the not worst time to be alive? I'm just happy that I'm allowed to have a credit card and try to earn my own living. But let us continue. Badiou notes here that we are getting a reactive, decadent version of the withering away of the state announced by Marx. Today's state is increasingly an administrative regulator of market egoism with no symbolic authority. This is the thing that I talked about, symbolic order, in the first video if you're interested. Lacking what Hegel perceived as the essence of the state, the all-encompassing community for which we are ready to sacrifice ourselves, the disintegration of the ethical substance is clearly signaled by the abolition of universal military conscriptions in many developed countries. I talk to a lot of Uber drivers, okay? But, you know, it's fun. You just meet people and anyway. The amount of men that I spoke to that are in a different country because they don't want to do conscription is not negligible. I met one in Prague, I met a few like here, and I mean, I have empathy. If you want to know my empathy for the male plight, single tear, watch Östlund's Force Majeure. The crux of the story is that there was an avalanche and this dad ran away without taking care of his wife and children, basically just fleeing the scene and having no courage. And the wife played like this very cold, judgmental role, and this is anticipating this section of the video. It was, to me, like, I was looking at it being like, I do not expect men, you know, they always say like women and children first. I think it's good because, you know, if there was a stampede, women and children are probably weaker than men and would probably not survive the stampede of men who would run away. So maybe that's why we've installed women and children first. But the idea that a man is supposed to be just willing to die instinctively, to me, is quite unrealistic. This guy just looked it. In that sense, like, I just feel that, you know, this lacking of symbolic, or what do you call it? Ethical substance, or something, I guess, to believe in, or something that gives objective meaning, something with symbolic authority, makes it less likely that to continue on. The very notion of being able to risk one's life for a common cause army appears more and more pointless, if not directly ridiculous, so that an armed force as the body in which all citizens equally participate is gradually turning into a mercenary force. Mercenary force, it's like, you know, black market, or, you know, being paid, or having something that is motivated other than this common cause of whatever it means to have a common cause to want to go to war. But we're not getting into politics today. But the idea is, you know, we're just lacking the sense of whatever unites us. This disintegration of a shared ethical substance affects the two sexes differently. Men are gradually turning into perpetual adolescents with no clear passage of initiation enacting their entry into maturity, military service, acquiring a profession, even education no longer plays this role. No wonder then that in order to supplant this lack, post-paternal youth gangs proliferate, providing ersatz, initiation, and social identity. In contrast to men, and before we go to women, I have a friend who's a vet, and he's actually killed people, and now he suffers from PTSD. But I also have this other friend who really looks up to this friend. He idealizes this friend because he does not have, for his personal reasons, which I will not share, could not conscript. And I think, like, you know, how true is true when you're just speaking to a bunch of men. But I also recently had a conversation with a friend who just, like, really just didn't seem to be able to grasp a sense of motivation to do things. And I'm going to end there, protect this person's story. But my advice essentially was, like, you needed something bigger that would follow you outside of university, outside of your home, and just follow you everywhere. Some kind of, like, deep purpose, which I personally have, that gets me out of bed every day. Which I won't go on and on about over here, but just something that's an overarching thing that's not limited to a task in a specific space is what I'm trying to say. So in contrast to men, women are today more and more precociously mature, treated as small adults, expected to control their lives, to plan their career. In this new version of sexual difference, men are ludic adolescents, outlaws, while women appear as hard, mature, serious, legal, and punitive, like the film that I mentioned, which is a really good film. And also it explores a lot of other themes as well, which I really like. One of it is, you know, how bad does something have to be before you acknowledge that it's bad? And then, like, there's this one scene, which I won't completely spoil, but it's, like, very clear that something bad could really happen, and this person decided to opt out, kind of like the Final Destination kind of thing. Like, you just opt out because you, like, had a premonition. But what happens is, like, everything runs smoothly after, and you feel like an idiot for thinking too much. And yet, had you picked the other option and it actually did turn out bad, it would have been catastrophic. So sorry, going back to this, and also sorry about my voice, I'm recovering from the flu. Women are today not called upon by the ruling ideology to subordinate themselves. They are called, solicited, expected to be judges, administrators, ministers, CEOs, teachers, policemen, and soldiers. I'm just gonna add here that you say all you want about this, but how many professors do I have that are women? Very little. Very little. If you hear me speak like my professor, the amount of times you hear me say she is so upsetting. And also, you know, try to write a dissertation that you only quote women and see what grade you get. Half the time, like, I'm pretty sure the reason why my dissertations do really well is because I only quote, like, you know, well-known white men, like Hegel, Zizek, you know, who else do I quote? I don't know, like Aristotle. That's my critique for here, being like, imagine having all these demands on you, but not having the possibility to realize these demands, or struggling to realize these demands. Hi. A pragmatic scene occurring daily in our security institutions is that of a female teacher, judge, psychologist, taking care of an immature and asocial young man delinquent. Again, this was written in 2017, 2018. I think, like, now we have very different imagery of women, at least from the content that I consume. It's this idea that like there's this rebellious deviation kind of woman who, you know, is like clearly oriented, but also she's like reckless at times because, you know, you gotta live life a little, etc., etc. So it's a bit dated, but maybe it was true from his content that he was consuming. A new figure of the feminine one is thus arising, a cold competitive agent of power, seductive, manipulative, attesting to the paradox that in the conditions of capitalism where women can do better than men. Just like leave that phrase up there for a second. If only I'm perturbed, I'll take this away. But finishing off, this of course in no way makes women suspicious as agents of capitalism. It merely signals that contemporary capitalism has invented its own ideal image of women. I think it's reductive, but I think it's very fruitful. I definitely feel like there's this like thing that Zizek said about like it's interesting about gender studies, it's everything but sex. From my understanding, the difference between sex and gender is one is biological, sex is biological, and gender is social. And yet, like, you know, based on what I'm learning in epistemology, the line is never clear. Yeah, I think it's self-explanatory, but just the comment of like how it is that the lack of something that unites us as an ethical substance, or maybe like a common goal, is something that is starting to create differences in two large identifiable categories in society. And yeah, it's just a very curious thing for me, this idea of like how it is that one side is allowed to be a child or is given this authority to be a child in a way, whereas the other one is expected to grow up because the other one's no longer adulting. Unless this is just my point of view as a female person. But yeah, also like this ideal image of a woman. Ideal in terms of who? I think like one thing, maybe this is too personal, but I'll end it on this. I think one thing that I could say about this idea of what I feel like we can all agree on, tell me in the comments if this is not something you agree with. But I think what idea that we can all agree on is that one thing that maybe we all search is this feeling of like being enough, not having to do something to prove our identity or to feel that we're of value. And I said to one of my friends during a walk by the Seine, so, sorry, it sounds like much more than it is, but it was just like I said, like, yeah, I had this conversation with other friend and we both agreed that we're searching for this moment where we're just okay with existing. And like I said, like even with like university grades, you know, academia, YouTube, everything that I've done in my past, like, you know, life in LA and all that stuff, it's just kind of like this placeholder for when I do not feel this immediate satisfaction of my own existence. But yeah, okay, so I'll leave you with that and I'll see you in the third video, which will be about the so-called solution or last resort because we have no choice, which is how we go from fear to angst. It's gonna be pretty short, but hopefully helpful nonetheless. See you there.